All right, we are officially recording. I have Dr. Ratey with me here today. Before we dive into any introductions or any of the podcast questions, I like to start off with an icebreaker. So, kind of set the stage a little bit, and then from there, we'll go into introductions. So I have this icebreaker card here with me, and let's see. Let's go with, when was the last time you felt really proud of someone in your family? You can choose between one of three. I'm going to read all three of them. Do you have any irrational phobias? And what product do you think people will use 500 years from now? Any one of those.
Well, the last time I was proud of someone in my family was with my grandkids here on Lake Huron up in Michigan. We are right on the lake. And I was very proud of them. They got up on paddle boards and were able to paddleboard at the age of 7 and 10. This is the first time they were on it, and my wife helped them stabilize and move around. So I was very proud of them.
Great, awesome. So a lot of the listeners are going to know who you are because I constantly recommend that everyone read your book, whether it's a classroom teacher or physical education teacher. But there are some people that might not know because I also work with some people in personal training, and I have a wide range of listeners, not just all physical educators. So, would you mind giving us like a little, very brief background of, who you are and what you've done?
Yes, I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, just to provide some context. I've been there for 40 plus years, and actually 50 years, I guess. But anyway, it's sort of awe-inspiring to think of that. But I've done a lot of research in my life on aggression, on attention deficit disorder, and on the benefits of exercise in the brain. What Anthony is always promoting is Spark, which is a book that I wrote in 2008 about the benefits of exercise and how it changes our brain. So I've always been very passionate about trying to make science understandable to people, not just professional people. But so our books, and I've had 12 of them, are all attempts at making hard science issues into something that everybody can understand, appreciate, and use.
And you did a great job with Spark, I'll say. It's definitely broken down a lot of science for me. And, I think when you understand the science, it just adds a motivation that might not have been there previously. When you really understand how the brain is wired, how the body is wired, how they're interconnected together, how there's physical chemicals in the body, it's, often when you can't see something, it's always maybe harder to believe it to be true. But when you understand that there's physical chemicals and, and you broke it down so well, and we'll dive into some of that today. First question. So if your background is psychiatry, what made you develop an interest in movement? What made you go in that direction?
Well, I was always an athlete. I played tennis, football, basketball, baseball throughout my early life, and tennis and squash, and now pickleball as I've aged. And I've ruined my shoulders from sport, from playing squash, skiing, anyway. So I'm more limited than I in terms of sport, but I've always continued to exercise personally and find it, as I always have, find it very useful for me and motivating. And anyway, that's how I got interested in movement. When I was in medical school back in the 70s, I had been working in mental health before that, and saw the introduction of our antidepressants, which were miracle drugs to make people less depressed. And then in medical school in the late 70s, there was an article in the press about a hospital in Norway that was admitting depressed patients and giving them an option of taking our new wonderful drugs or developing an exercise program or participating in an exercise program 3 times a day, exercising in the hospital. And what they found at the end of 2 weeks, the results were the same. Everybody became less depressed and less depressed enough to be discharged. So this piqued my interest as I was going into psychiatry eventually. And I followed the whole field from there on about how exercise had such a tremendous impact on our brains and on our mental health, and then learning later on our cognitive health. So then I began to talk about attention deficit disorder, one of my early findings. And a professor from MIT and Harvard heard me speak in the cocktail party, and he asked whether he could come see me. He came in and he said, as a patient, and he said, look, I have had an illustrious career, written all kinds of stuff, lectured all over the world. But lately I've had all the symptoms of attention deficit disorder. The story is that he was a marathoner his whole life, and recently had a bum knee and was rehabbing that, but hadn't been able to run. And so his mood was worse, but most importantly, he couldn't pay attention like he did before. He was procrastinating, he was forgetting things, he was putting things off, he was getting angry, all the symptoms of attention deficit disorder, which he hadn't had because he was an everyday runner. He was a marathoner early in the Boston Athletic Club. Anyway, so I treated him with medication and followed him. He got much better. Then he was rehabbing his knee all along, and then began to return to his 7 miles a day. And eventually we both decided that he didn't need his medicine anymore. And this led to 2 major careers in attention deficit disorder and in exercise, and how exercise had such a profound effect on our brains, on our attention. And this led me to follow this throughout my career. Began lecturing about ADHD and ADD, we called it then, and one of the components of treatment was always exercise. It was always physical exercise, movement, and began to really focus on that, lecture about it, learn about it.
Was movement always a respected treatment in psychiatry? Would you say that's a newer trend, or still something we're working towards? Or
it was never respected. It's even with data that I put in my book. It's not something that most psychiatrists are aware of. I think more so these days, but certainly when I wrote the book, it was not respected. It was like the value of physical education It was not. It was a Henny Youngman, and you won't know who Henny Youngman is, but he was a comedian that always talked about he can't get any respect. PE teachers don't get the kind of respect that they need and should have, nor exercise in mental health doesn't get the respect that it deserves.
Mm. And do you think that that's because exercise is free? I know that's a big question.
I think that's part of it, but also that it's exercise is hard for people to get their head around, to see it as valuable as it can be.
It's almost too easy, right? Too easy of an answer.
Yeah, just with your slide in the background there, just put on, you buy a pair of shoes, running shoes, and you're there. It's not just about the money, though. It's about getting people to start and stay with it.
Mm.
And that's a big problem.
Mm. So that makes sense to me. Yeah. So taking on a new habit, it's going to be much easier to take a pill than to change behavior.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. So yeah, that's even more the importance of physical education, because if we can target the kids when they're young and build those habits when they're young, hopefully they last into older years. But shifting gears just a little bit, thinking about stress. I know you had a whole chapter in your book on stress, and what's the relationship between stress and movement? I know you kind of dug a little bit into like on an evolutionary scale, thinking about how we evolved and what how our systems evolved in the brain, and I'm curious, what is the relationship between stress and movement, and maybe on a historical level, how we evolved? Does that play a role in that at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I love talking about stress. We just when we handed our book in, we had to cut a bunch of chapters down because they were too long. And stress, we had to eliminate probably half of the stuff we put in there because I was so excited about stress, so excited about how exercise helped deal with stress. And yes, it from an evolutionary perspective, it's important for things like mood, cognition, and stress. Because if we were moving all the time, like we were when we were hunter-gatherers, if we were moving 8 to 10 miles a day on average, lifting, changing, swimming, climbing, changing our walking, paying attention to the world around us, our brains would be much better than they are today, just basically. And so with that, we were moving back then, and that was an anti-stress event. When we're moving, that's why I spent so much time on talking about stress in my book, because stress is so important for health. Now, exercise is stress, absolutely is stress. But what happens is if you have a bout of exercise or a continuous bout of exercise on a regular basis, you will change the dynamics, what's going on within your brain cells, within our cells in the body as well. You will cause stress leads to growth. Does that happen? Stress leads to damaging our muscles. You guys in PE know that, right? You're snapping muscle fibers. You're stressing them. You're changing. You're injuring your muscles, and this leads to repair and recovery. And when you do that, you cause growth. So just as if you're training your muscles and you want to get bigger muscles, you stretch your muscles. And what does this do? It damages your muscles, but it causes a growth. The same thing happens with our cells in our brain. We stress them, we overuse them, we tax them, but that leads to growth of our cells, leads to the change in the internal dynamics of what's going on within our cells. Within our brain cells, we have what I call the janitorial services inside of our brain. Because when you're using your brain cells, you burn glucose, you burn ATP, for your mitochondria inside your brain cells work. Mm. And what we have are these enzymes and proteins within our brain cells, within our cells in general, but brain cells particular, that deal with these products of use. And it usually causes inflammation. Well, we make more of these janitorial services to deal with these breakdown products, to get rid of them, to repair the internal cell. This leads to eventually making more repair units than you had before or that was necessary to do the repair. You make more. So you prepare for the next stressor. That's within the cell. Now, the brain as a whole, when you stress the brain, you also build more of a response to stress. Mm. You become more familiar with stress. You make more neurotransmitters and hormones that help deal with stress. And if you make more of that stuff, then the next stress you have will be you won't freak out as much. Your brain won't freak out as much because it's already prepared. So it will take more of a stressor. It will take more of a threat for you to respond, for your brain to respond in a stressful way. So you've heard of the panic episode or the panic response or fight or flight. If you are fit physically, it will that which will cause panic and fight or flight, it will take more of that, a higher degree of it, to get you into that mode. You won't freak out. You won't turn on your sympathetic nervous system and increase your heart rate, increase your pulse rate, increase your breathing rate as quickly as you might have before. So this then causes this huge anti-stress effect.
And is that because your body's used to that stimulus happening? For example, fast heart rate, sweating, or all the whether it's stress with exercise or whether it's stress that you're just thinking about, it's the same physical response that happens.
Correct. And what it's not just being used to it, but you sort of guard against the response. You're more accustomed to that level of, and it's really about threat. You know, the threat from without or from within. You're less likely to go into that advanced heart rate and breathing rate, and to which prepares you to go into the fight or flight.
So I don't want to cut you off, but can I go with the next question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So because it's still related to stress, but when it comes to coping with stress, right? So for example, exercise can be used to, it can be used as a tool to cope with stress, but how does that compare to something like alcohol? Like, why would exercise be different than alcohol when it comes to coping with stress?
Well, alcohol has many different effects, right? But one of them is to help you forget about it.
Right.
Yeah, or see it as not being that problematic,
Right.
and so it sort of tamps down the whole brain effect. Well, with exercise, it's not even getting to, it's preventing you from getting to that excitable point.
Hmm.
So you're preventing stress from occurring.
Mm, right. Yeah. Because I think about it, someone told me recently something along the lines of they hinted at side effects, trying to minimize the side effects. So, for example, when it comes to something like movement, you're going to have less unpleasant side effects. Whereas with something like alcohol, it might be able to relieve something in a moment, but there's going to be these other side effects that come with it that you don't necessarily want.
Correct.
Yeah. So the other big piece about stress that stood out to me was mild stress. You had a couple of things in your book where there was the study on radiation and, things in that realm. And you kind of just touched on it a little bit. And I did a post back in the day and it just was titled mild stress. And I guess the importance of having stress in your life, but not having too much stress. And it's this constant balance of the two. Maybe could you speak to that?
Yeah, what you're referring to is a study out of looking at radiation, mild radiation that people get working on the submarines or nuclear subs. People there thought initially, oh my God, these people working on our subs, because there is going to be radiation around it, that they're going to be more prone to cancer, heart disease, all the ravages of too much radiation. Well, what they found is just the opposite.
Mm.
They found that a mild amount of stress was actually preventive, actually helped to prevent things like heart disease, like cancers, all that, because you were, again, sort of using preventative measures to really sort of introduce you to these kinds of stresses a little bit at a time. And that builds up a general resilience in the body and in the brain.
So shifting gears slightly to learning and movement's impact on learning. I did a post recently that said something along the lines of the body gives the brain a reason for being. And so I'm curious your thoughts on this and if it makes sense at all. But like it seems like the more you move, the more calories you need. The more calories you need, the more you need to be able to think abstractly to attain those calories. It almost seems as though, and I mean that might be a bit of a stretch there, but it seems like there's definitely a evolutionary link between the body and the mind and how they benefit one another. And yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, your conclusion is wrong.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Yeah, your conclusion is wrong. It's not, we don't make the brain better just so we get more calories. Right. However, what's right is that our brain was evolved to help us be the best movers. And by that, meaning endurance, meaning cleverness, meaning balance and coordination, all the kinds of things that are important for us as humans. in terms of being the evolutionary victors.
Mm.
We had our brains developed to help us be the best movers.
Mm.
Coordination, creativity, moving the right way, remembering how to move, remembering different protocols that we had in terms of capturing game, finding routes and shoots to live off of where things were. All that we promoted in our brains and developed those pathways and developed those nerve cells.
Mm.
So that this is why a good part of our brain, all of our 100 billion brain cells that we have, a good number of them are involved with movement.
Mm.
So that when you move, you are turning those brain cells on, meaning you're activating them. And when you activate them, you make them ready to be used. So, like, one of the things is if you do 5 minutes of jump rope before you sit down to study something that you have a hard time studying, your brain will be turned on and you will be able to study things quicker, better, and remember things more.
Mm.
Because you've turned those brain cells on as well. And this is where I think the magic of Spark is for people as well. You're creating all these chemicals in your brain that help support learning. It helps support what we've learned as a basic way we learn anything, which is to grow our brain cells, to grow the edges of them, the what we call the presynapse and the postsynapse. Both sides grow when you use those cells, and you create neurohormones. Basically, it's hormones and such that foster the growth. And the big one is BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which I called miracle grow for the brain, which is what it is. It is brain fertilizer. So it helps keep our brain cells young and perky, and also have them ready to grow. And so when you're taking in information that you want to remember, you have to grow the information in.
Mm.
And to ready the brain to do that, there's nothing better than a bout of exercise.
Mm. I'm getting a little bit of a fuzzy memory here, but was it your book that mentioned the piece about like the sea squirt or something like that, where the when it no longer has a reason to move, it kind of gets rid of its brain?
Absolutely. Yeah, the C squared is a good example. A piece of the way coral, unfortunately, with we're going to need a lot more C squirts with our coral going away now. But the way coral grows is it knocks off a piece of it. It becomes a sea squirt. And a sea squirt sort of swims around and has a brain and everything, and until it attaches to another piece of coral or a rock somewhere, and then it begins to eat its own brain, to metabolize its own brain, so that it just becomes brainless, if you will, and then becomes a beautiful coral, which we've ruined with global warming.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I often, there's some things that I, conclusions I come to that, they might be a little stretched, but again, another one I'll often say is movement is life. And it seems to me as though the more that you move, even down to a plant. I watched the other day, there was a video of a plant moving in slow-mo, like it recorded the plant throughout the day and then watched it in fast forward, and you watched the plant move throughout the day. And so even down to a plant or something that you would think doesn't have as much life in it, most of the things in our world that are living are moving. Movement is a good sign of life.
Absolutely. And when you, and this is the problem with being sedentary, right? Our sedentary world that we have, because we're not moving as much. And what we know is that we begin to erode, just like the sea squirt, erode our brains, erode our bodies. So the movement challenges our body and our brain to grow, to say evolutionarily and encoded information. It says, oh yeah, we need more cells here. We need to support this need, this whatever the need is, to move this way, that way, to think, to understand things. So we're promoting that. So hey, let's get more stuff here. Let's get more oxygen. Let's get more glucose. Let's get more fibers that we need. And this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. So, and this is what I talk about a lot when I talk about aging, and say basically it's better to erode through overuse than it is to waste away.
Oh, that's so good. There's a great one that says, I think it's Teddy Roosevelt, I'd rather wear out than rust out.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really
rusting out is the horror. And so that's why the anti-aging people, and I talk about it in my book, recommend that you always are doing something, using your muscles, using your body, using your brains to move forward. And when you stop, when you get sedentary, when you stop thinking, when you stop wanting, that's when you begin to rust and erode that way.
Which is a fairly efficient system, I think, if you think about it globally, right? It's like the things that have a motivation to move and a reason to move and to get out and do those things. And those that don't, it's like conserve that energy and place it in an area that is efficiently being used on a global sense or on a grand sense, thinking as if we're all intertwined and one maybe like giant being in a sense, but it's efficiency for the earth to use energy and calories and things in a way that's most efficient, it seems like.
Yeah, and all directed towards growth.
Yeah.
When you stop growing, you start eroding. You start rusting.
So movement is clearly a way to be able to provide that stimulus in the brain. Staying on the topic though of learning, how does learning happen at all? So thinking about movement's relationship to it, but how does learning even happen in the brain?
Well, and I sort of alluded to it. Basically what you do is you have two nerve cells, one pre and one post. The pre will excite the post by sending neurotransmitters across what we call the synaptic cleft. When you stimulate the pre-nerve cell, the presynaptic nerve cell, it will send neurotransmitters across to the postsynapse and cause receptor cells on that side to fire, and then you transmit, and then it goes on and on and on. And you do this 100 billion times, okay? And you do it very quickly. And as you continue to excite and or cause the presynaptic cell to release, you build more neurotransmitter in the presynaptic cell. You build more. And when you are sending it across, you build more receptors. Well, that's growth. And if you're trying to remember a red car, you'll remember red, you remember car, you remember this, you remember that in terms of, what we call the neural complex around red truck, a red car. And this all works in a big symphony in your brain. But basically, you need to have that growth happen to hold that memory.
The complex that you mentioned, is that like a unique pattern of?
It's a unique pattern, but it's the concept of red, for instance, will be supported in other complexes, right? So it sort of tags along, and you support things. So that's why when you're learning a whole new field, learning the basics will then trigger some association as you're learning more of the complicated parts of whatever thing you're trying to break down and trying to learn.
So learning pretty much always is going to come down to the health of those nerve cells.
Oh, absolutely. That's the key.
Right.
And so when you are exercising or moving, you're turning those brain cells on, which means you're saying, hey, you're alive, continue to grow.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So two questions I want to follow up with. One, I'll start with, I think, the easier one. You said exercising before. Sometimes, the other day I was in the gym, I saw someone on the treadmill and they were reading the book while on the treadmill. And what are your thoughts on exercising while learning versus exercise before learning?
Both work. The problem is if you exercise, if you're going too much, if you're exercising too much in terms of your brain, you're stealing oxygen and blood flow from one part of the brain to another. So if you're walking comfortably and reading, you're going to have the same benefit or maybe even more than if you're walked and then stopped and then read. Both of them are going to be useful, but you reach a limit if you're going too fast or too hard. However, a nice study, which I think is in my book, I'm not sure, it came out of, I think, a little bit around that or after, a study looking at just thinking, being creative in terms of exercise. So they did this big study out at Stanford showing, looking at a group of students while they were sitting comfortably, and gave them all these tests of creativity. Then they had them, another group, another time they came in and had them do similar kinds of creative tests while they were exercising, while they were moving, walking. Then they had them come in and walk and then gave them this creative test. And what they found was, to their surprise, they thought it was going to be the best improvement was going to be after they walked. Well, no, it was during their walking. For creativity. For memorizing, it's a little different. It's probably better afterwards. Although if you're not walking too fast, too hard, too stressed, it probably is similar.
So when it comes to school systems, should we have kids moving in the classroom more?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And studies have shown this again and again, but we never learn from that.
Right. Yeah, there's always some type of competing priority that seems to hold us back, even though it's very obvious. You know?
Yeah, the whole issue of seat time versus moving is won by people that don't like to move.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very valid point. Do you have students move in your classroom? Like, I know on your TED Talks, I saw you had them do the Hindu squat. Yeah,
I do that all the time when I'm lecturing. I have people get up and do some movement before I begin.
yeah.
It turns
Uh,
on their attention system and makes them more ready to take in information in every which way.
hmm. What about the difference between dynamic versus linear movement? So what I mean by that is, I noticed in the book in Naperville in the physical education class, a lot of it was a little bit fitness based, where maybe they're at a station and they're doing a fitness workout, or maybe, for example, someone could be running on a treadmill. Like those would be examples of linear movement, whereas dynamic might be more so playful, where you're reacting to a game type of setting or to an opponent, and it's more complex, like chess, where there's more moving pieces and a lot of variety as to how I can respond to a situation. But so is there a difference between linear and dynamic? Should we have more playful movement, or should we stick to just fitness based movement, or do you think there's a difference?
There is a big difference. So the answer is both and.
Mm,
It's not one or the other. It's both and. So what you're calling dynamic movement, like play, it's all about changing. It's all about using more brain cells
mm,
than just moving forward on a treadmill inside. So the best kind of movement is outside, varied movement. That is playing a game or walking or running along outside along a mountain path, because you're having to pay attention as opposed to the treadmill where you can really space out. Because if you're attending to the changing environment and where you're putting your feet and are you going to trip on a rock and or a root, that engages more brain cells, and the more you do that, the better. The ultimate is something like playing soccer or ice hockey or field hockey, where you're having to change all the time and react to the environment, to what you're trying to do, to the other person. And we're running short here of time, so I want to get this in. And perhaps the best movement is dance. If you think about dance, what that does, you're not only moving so many muscles, which is causing so much brain to be firing away, but you're having to move in some kind of scripted way to get the dance moves down. And you're listening to music, which driving the movement, right? Driving you to different positions. And you are doing it with others. So you're having to interface, just like in basketball or hockey, which is another kind of involvement of more brain cells. So what you're really after is exciting as many brain cells as you can, because that leads to a lot more growth.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, and it seems like the more variables you have, which is kind of what I think you just said, and dance seems to have a tremendous amount of variables, and in fact, you can create a variable right on the spot, one that someone's never even seen before.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so dance provides a tremendous stimulus to maintaining brain health.
Yeah, as does martial arts, as does tumbling,
Mm.
as does many of the games that demand so much of your brain to react. I mean, so one important area that's gotten more emphasis since Spark and more uh, support scientifically is balance and coordination. I can't tell you how important that is in terms of the brain, turning the brain on, getting the brain to work best, using more brain cells even than you did before. So, and that's where sport comes in, right? Sport is all about, you use balance and coordination a lot, but and that's where we need to do more of that. I spend a lot of time as I'm aging in balance and coordination because I wasn't the greatest beforehand, but boy, as you age, it goes away. And it's so important to keep after it because stabilization, balance, all that stuff, so important, so important.
Do you train it individually or do you train it through play?
Both.
Right.
Both. Pickleball, great sport for us aging folks, because we learned very quickly that the most important phrase in pickleball is "nice shot," which means you let the point over if it's whereas before you might run to get it, but you got to protect yourself. The dangers of pickleball, that's another whole problem. Some people realize that it's dangerous.
Right.
In fact, the orthopedic surgeons love pickleball because they get a lot of work. A lot of patients coming in, straining this, breaking that. I can't tell you, there's one lady who's in Hawaii who won't play pickleball because she says it's far too dangerous. And this is a woman who does all kinds of movement, all kinds of stuff, biking, running, hula dancing, Zumba. She's always on the move, but won't play pickleball. Won't. Plays tennis, but not pickleball.
Do you think it's worth the investment still? So meaning, I guess no matter, the more dynamic an activity gets, the more potential for injury, I think almost across the board. So it's like it's benefiting us more. So as long as we don't get injured, there is the potential to get injured. But would you say it's still worth it? Is it still worth the bang for the buck?
Oh yeah. Oh God, yes, it's still worth it, and but you have to learn to temper your movements, especially as we age, because you fall once and break a hip. That's no good.
Right. So it's a fine balance, just like many things in life.
Yes.
I know we're getting close to the end here. I had two last questions for you. Would you say that movement is homeostatic? Is it something that our body requires, kind of like food? Like it would be unethical to restrict it from someone?
Well, yes, I think it very much is, and so even fighting disease, the big addition is having people move with fighting cancers, fighting heart disease, fighting diabetes, whatever it is. Movement is key and crucial because it helps boost our immune response and decrease our chronic inflammation. And those are important factors, as we've learned today.
And you've hinted at it throughout the whole podcast, but it sounds like you still move and your exercise routine is pickleball.
Oh no, my exercise routine is all kinds of stuff. No, not just pickleball. I do yoga, and I'm gonna. We used to do it 3 times a week here. but we're going to get back to it. But now it's just a couple of times a week. We do cardio drumming, which is an aerobic exercise, right? And we do walking. We live right here on the beach and have a great walk as long as you want on right on the edge of Lake Huron. So and we have a car here and at our different places that we live, but we want to never use it because we want to walk to our destination, where it is, the post office, to get coffee. I have a habit in 3 of my 4 areas that we live, where I go every morning for coffee. Yeah, I have to pay for it, so that's a pain. But one's a mile away. This is about 3/4 of a mile. Another is just a half a mile. But it's a way to start the day.
I love that. You know what, though, when you do the math, if you think about how much a gym membership is, and you're walking on the treadmill at the gym, you might be making out. You know.
Yeah, well, the gym offers all kinds of other things, like making your muscles grow. Yeah, no, I personally, I'm in personal training twice a week here, and focusing on.
You do like.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I ruined both shoulders, so I don't lift much. But but working on it, back and arms, and certainly legs and core and stabilization muscles. By the way, that's an important one. Stabilization muscles, the adductors of your hips. Oh boy, huge, important as you age.
Right. Wow, so it sounds like you have a robust exercise routine.
Oh God, yes, yeah. I've always had, and when I don't, I realize how quickly it goes away.
Yeah, it's very true.
Okay. I'm going to have to stop. I have a hard stop here. Enjoyed speaking with you, and good luck to you.
I thank you so much. This was a wonderful opportunity to get to speak with you, and I appreciate your time.
Okay. Bye now.
All right. See you.